Tobago. Good morning to all of the listeners of the Street 919 FM, all of the loyal listeners. Good morning and happy Emancipation Day to all. Yes, it's August 1st. Where is the year going? Just 5 months left in the year. So, as I always tell you, wherever it is you're taking us in, if it is that you are sitting around your kitchen table having your morning coffee, your breakfast, good morning to Mr. and Mrs. Giuseppe. You are in your hammock. If it is that you're in your car, making your way to or from the grocery on the market, good morning to you. Those of us who will be cooking our special Emancipation Day lunch today, whatever that might entail. And morning, Angie. Good morning to Mr. and Mrs. Regis and to my colleagues Sharon and Bruce. Good morning, all. Always a pleasure to be with you on a Sunday morning. Let's see here. Right, so it's already 11:19, so let's just get straight into it. So as I had promised last week, we continue with our discussions as regards the National Insurance Board, the National Insurance System, in respect of the recent pronouncements that we would have heard with regards to the solvency or the continued solvency of the National Insurance Fund and its ability to continue to maintain its benefit liabilities. And we're not just talking about pension, but the other 22 benefits that are also offered by the National Insurance System. And coming out of the recent the 10th actuarial review, which showed that there is a need for a number of measures, a number of recommendations to be put into place to ensure that the fund continues for a long time, so that all of those persons who are contributing will be able to continue to receive their benefits. So, let me see here. Right. So I will start this week, as I did last week, by reading an article that speaks to that issue. This week's article is entitled, NIB to Sell Assets to Pay Benefits in the Next 2 to 4 Years. And this is an article that was published in the Express on June 26, 2021. The National Insurance Board is expecting a 10% decline in contributions for the fiscal year 2021. As such, the National Insurance Board said it may soon be forced to liquidate assets to generate income, as it now has to pay out more than it is earning from contributions. Already, the number of contributors in the National Insurance System declined by 4% from 420,638 in 2019 to 404,197 in 2020. The National Insurance Board had 516,926 contributors for the 12 months ended June 30th, 2015, according to its annual report that year. This means the number of NIB contributors fell by 21.8% between 2015 and 2020. The number of beneficiaries increased, however, by 0.9% from 202,800 in 2019 to 204,613 in 2020. In its report, or rather in its 2020 report on operations, laid in Parliament last Friday, the National Insurance Board noted that the widening gap between the contributions it received and the benefits it pays out could cause it to liquidate assets to meet its commitments in the next 2 to 4 years. Of continuing great concern over the last 6 to 7 years is the increase in the disparity between contribution income and benefit expenditure. This growing shortfall has been supplemented by investment income. If the status quo is maintained, it is projected that as early as the next 2 to 4 years, assets will have to be liquidated to ensure that benefits can continue to be paid in full, said the report by the company's executive director, Niala Prasad Pulaya. Contribution income declined by 0.44% from 4,706.49 billion in 2019 to 4,685,000.85 billion in 2020. The report noted that since 2016, the National Insurance Board has had to access its investment portfolio to fund its benefits. In 2016, that sum was 261.54 million. In 2017, it was 140.26 million. 2018, it was 226.16 million. and in 2019 it went up to a whopping 664.65 million. These sums include, or rather exclude, administrative expenses of 200 million for each year. And the report noted that for fiscal 2020, the shortfall that was needed to be financed by investment income was $916 million, which included administrative expenditure of $251.17 million. Notwithstanding the challenges, the National Insurance Board has been able to meet its overall contribution income target for fiscal 2020 on the strength of arrears collected, while we observed a decline in the level of regular contribution income as a result of the closure of some businesses due to the pandemic within the last quarter of the financial year, said Prasad Pallaya. The NIB's financial year ends on June 30th. Hiring debt collectors. The report noted that challenges affected the economy as the energy sector continued to suffer from depressed output on account of lower prices internationally. According to the IMF forecast, which reflects the world's pre-COVID-19 pandemic economic conditions, some hope would have existed for 2021. However, the forecasted GDP of 2.6% for Trinidad and Tobago is unlikely to be realized. The NIB is not only impacted by the economic downturn due to COVID, but also the decrease in the price of oil and gas. Both are expected to have a measurable impact on the level of employment and ultimately contribution income. In the incoming financial year, contribution income is also expected to decline by 10% when compared to the level of contribution income for fiscal 2020. The negative economic situation will also impact our investments as the receipt of dividends will fall due to the uncertainty resulting from the economic fallout from COVID-19. Considering the likely impact, we will focus on the strategic collections of arrears and the filling of key vacancies for authorized officers, whose performance monitoring and management will be more appropriately linked to debt collection. In a statement to Parliament on Friday, Minister Carl Mimbert said that as part of its continuing efforts to safeguard its assets, the National Insurance Board continued to utilize all legal measures to ensure the recovery of monies owed. Through court agreements, promissory notes, as well as litigation actions, the NIB recovered a total of $128.6 million in contribution arrears, penalties, and interest from 22 non-compliant employers. In addition, 2 judgments were obtained against employers and/or directors for arrears of contributions, penalties, and interest payments in the amount of $1.9 million. He noted that during the 2020 financial year, 154 appeal notices were received by the Appeals Tribunal, on which 171 were issued responses by the NIBTT. This figure includes some appeal matters from the last financial year. In the area of reciprocal agreements, Madam Speaker, during the financial year 2020, 225 of 534 backlog applications made by persons in Canada and CARICOM accessing Trinidad and Tobago benefits through their relevant social insurance partners were authorized and payments finalized. As at the 30th of June 2020, 211 applications were awaiting responses from CARICOM and Canada, which have not been reactivated. 74 responses were received and are to be processed upon submission of life certificates. The country's aging population continues to be an area of concern for the National Insurance Board. This dynamic is represented by a decrease in the number of births, resulting in a decline in the working population and a sharp increase in pensioners. And this trend, based on NIS data as well as data from the Central Statistical Office, has classified Trinidad and Tobago's population as an aging society, with 13.4% of the population aged 60 and over. And in fact, since 2010, the number of pensioners has increased by over 50%, with the number of pensioners projected to increase again by more than 40% in the next 10 years. This drastic increase will put a strain on the system as a shrinking contributory base supports a growing number of beneficiaries. The NIB's investment portfolio has a market value of $27.73 billion, and the decrease in the fund's market value was mainly attributable to approximately $120 million in unrealized losses. The equity and fixed income portfolios accounting for $10 million and $87 million respectively of these unrealized losses. The worldwide pandemic has significantly affected global markets, as equities in particular have experienced the steepest decline since the global financial crisis. As such, NIB net investment yield experienced a decline from 8.08% in 2019 to 4.38% in 2020. She noted that the decreases in the NIB's investment portfolio was further accelerated by withdrawals of $950 million from the investment cash account to support the shortfall between expenditure and contribution income. The NIB's portfolio include real estate, mutual fund, cash and cash equivalents, mortgages, fixed income 33.78% and equity 52.68%. You see here, I don't want to... There's some things that we don't really need to go through. Right, employers declined by 2.12% from 20,774 to 20,274. And insured contributors declined by 4% from 420,688 to 404,197. Customer base also declined by 1.89% from 599,768 to 588,401. The report noted that in 2020, the number of employers registering with the NIB was 1,752, which was a 14.54% decrease from 2019. All right, so there's some other information in that article, but it's too long. But if it is that you want to read the article in its entirety, you can just Google NIB to sell assets to pay benefits in the next 2 to 4 years. And it's an Express article from June 26, 2021. I believe that our YouTube stream is now back up after a little hiatus because, as we would have indicated to you, we would have been flagged on account of discussions surrounding the jabs. So going forward, we are asking persons to please refrain from any discussion with respect to jabs. All right, whether you're right or you're wrong, YouTube not playing. So it would be Iwer TV live broadcast. So just go on YouTube, type in Iwer TV live broadcast, and then you should be able to access us on YouTube and, of course, on Facebook, The Street 919 FM. Right. So, continuing from last week's conversation, we would have started to discuss some of the recommendations in the 10th Actuarial Review of the National Insurance Board, where certain recommendations would have come out as to how we can treat with what I would have just read about, the potential for, the significant shortfalls that the National Insurance Board has been experiencing income versus the benefits that they are paying out. And last week we would have touched on recommendation number 1, which is to extend the retirement age to age 65. And I would have explained that does not necessarily mean that you would have to wait until age 65 to get your NIS pension, but rather that what is being proposed is that you would get a reduced benefit from age 60, and then in order to receive the full pension, you would have to opt to restart receiving your pension from age 65, but you would be given the opportunity to take your pension anywhere between age 60 to age 65, and the longer that you wait between age 60 and 65 is the bigger the pension you will receive. But I guess it's to be determined what that minimum pension will be at age 60 and what the annual increment would be between age 60 and 65. So all of that will come out when the government engages in the public consultation to hear from you, the public, what you think should be done and what you may be willing to accommodate to fix the problem. So today we will go on to recommendation number 2, which is to increase the contribution rates into the plan. So last week I would have read out for you what the contribution rates are for the National Insurance Board. I would have indicated to you that there are 16 earnings classes, and what you contribute on a weekly or monthly basis is determined based on the earnings class in which you fall into. The lowest earnings class being persons who earn between $200 to $340 per week, and the highest earnings class, persons who earn between $3,138, persons who earn $3,138 and over, or $13,600 and over per month. So 2 of the options that they may want to look at with respect to increasing contribution rates would be either 1, maintain the current 16 earnings classes and simply increase the rates of contribution in each one of these classes. I think the proposed rate of increase was 3%. Or option number 2 would be for them to expand the number of earnings classes from 16 to whatever number, so that whereas it says here that persons earning $13,600 and over would pay $138 per week, and the employer would pay $276 per week. What they can possibly do then is to increase the earnings classes by maybe another 4 or 5. So rather than persons earning $13,600 and over per month, all paying the same, they could probably have a new earnings class from, let's say, $13,600 to maybe $15,000 and have a particular rate for them. Then they could probably go persons earning $15,000 to maybe $16,500. They would have another rate for them, and so on. Now, I can already see some pushback coming from persons who would fall into these new earnings classes on account of the fact that they may complain, well, we are being made to pay more, but we are subject to receiving the same pension and the same benefits as everybody else. And that would be a fair complaint for them to make. But I know persons business owners who contribute to the National Insurance Fund at the highest rates and choose not to take the pension or choose not to access any of the benefits on account of their financial circumstance where they don't really need this money. And so they contribute legally, but when the time comes for them to access the benefits, some of them opt not to do so. And speaking here from persons who have clients who I've spoken to on a personal basis who have indicated that to me. There is no obligation on your part to access the benefits if you don't want it. But there is a legal obligation to contribute once you fall under the category of employee. Right, so that was option number 2, to increase the rates. Option number 3 is to freeze the pension at $3,000. Now, as I would have indicated last week, there are persons who are in receipt of NIS pensions in excess of the $3,000. In fact, there are persons who are in receipt of NIS pensions as high as, I think, $5,100. And this, of course, would be as a result of the amount of contributions that they would have made into the National Insurance Fund. Now, as I said before, you require only 750 contributions, a minimum of 750 contributions to qualify for an NIS pension. But if you contribute more than the 750, for each additional 25 contributions that you make in excess of the 750 entitles you to increments. And those increments would be determined, the dollar value of those increments rather, would be determined based on the earnings class in which you would have made the majority of your contributions. So of course, if you were contributing in the higher earnings class, at the higher rung of the earnings class ladder, these persons more than likely would be the ones who are receiving these higher pensions, as opposed to persons who would have been paying in the lower earnings class. Now, it's important to make the distinction and make the point that not everybody who contributes in excess of 750 contributions would qualify for a higher pension. And the reason is this. When it comes to pensions, there are two types basically. One is called a defined benefit plan. The other one is a defined contribution plan. The National Insurance Pension is a sort of hybrid of both the defined benefit and the defined contribution, in that the benefit is defined $3,000 a month minimum. The contribution is also defined by the contribution rates that you are required to pay depending on which earnings class you fall into. Normally, in the private sector, it would be either or, defined benefit or a defined contribution plan. And this is usually for private plans that companies would offer. Now, under defined benefit plan, as I said before, the amount of pension that you would be receiving at retirement is known beforehand. So in this case, you know it's $3,000 pension, NIS. But in the private sector, for instance, they can either stipulate a dollar amount similar to the national insurance system, or they might have a specific formula that they use. So for instance, they may tell you, if it's a private company, they may tell you, well, there's a formula in place to determine the pension, whether it is a percentage of your average salary for the last 3 years that you worked, or the last 5 years that you worked. Or, for instance, they may tell you, well, if you work 33 and a third years, your pension would be 2/3 of your final salary. All of these different things. There are specific different formulas that would apply, but you can use the formula to do your own calculations to determine exactly what your pension is going to be up front. With the defined contribution plan, however, what usually obtains is you are told beforehand how much you have to contribute into the plan. So again, coming back to the private sector, what normally obtains, if it's an employer-sponsored plan, what they would do, the employer may say, well, okay, the employee is required to contribute 5% to the plan, and the employer will match that 5%, or the employee contributes 5% and the employer contributes 10% of salary. Some plans, the employers do all of the contributions themselves, and they make it's optional if the employees want to contribute. Some employers make it non-contributory because their plans might have what is called a vesting rule based on the plan rules, so that in order for you to benefit from a pension in this plan, you would need to have been a permanent employee in the company for a specified number of years. So some companies, I know as a general rule, it's usually 5 years permanent. And once you would have made your 5 years, even if you leave the company before your retirement to go and work somewhere else, because you would have been vested in this plan, you would still be entitled to a pension when you reach age 60, albeit that you would have left the company years ago. So whatever would have been applied to your notional account in that group plan will continue to earn interest and so on. And then when you reach age 60, or whatever is the retirement age for that particular plan, you would be entitled to receive your pension benefits. So there are some people, I used to work in the bank and I would have been vested and then I left the bank. So when I reach age 60, I'm entitled to a pension of whatever my contributions up to, or what would have been contributed for me in that plan up to the retirement, up to the time that I left. Whatever that amounts to when I reach age 60 would entitle me to some sort of benefit, whether it's a pension or if they opt to make a one-time payment. Again, all of these things are determined by the plan rules. But coming back to the national insurance system, because it's a hybrid of both defined benefit and defined contribution, the fact is, if it was a strictly defined contribution plan, what would have happened normally is that with a defined contribution plan, you make your contributions during the accumulation period, your work life. And when you reach the retirement age, you would then be told what pension you will be able to get based on how much money is in your fund. So just to give some examples, in the private sector, if you have an accumulation, a lump sum of 125,000, that could probably give you a pension of between $730 to $750 per month, depending on what is called your minimum guarantee period. If you have $500,000, $550,000, that could probably give you a pension of anywhere between $550,000 to $600,000. That could give you a pension of anywhere between $2,800 to $3,000 a month for the rest of your life. Right? These plans are paid for until you die. Now, under the national insurance system, as I was saying, if it is that you were operating under the strictly defined contribution plan where you contribute employer-employee, and then when you reach age 60, they would tell you, well, okay, this is how much you have in the fund, and this is what pension you would be able to get. Because not everybody contributes the same amount based on one, earnings class, and two, the number of years that they would have contributed to the plan. At age 60, the amount of money that everybody would have in their notional account is different. But for persons who contribute in the lower earnings class, under a defined contribution plan, more than likely the amount of money that they would have had in their fund at retirement would not have been sufficient to pay them a monthly pension of $3,000. What happens is that if they have contributed more than the 750 contributions, the minimum to get a pension, the increments that would normally have enabled them to get a pension beyond $3,000, those increments would be used to bring them up to the $3,000, or as close to the $3,000